I'd like to hear from Jim Brown, Marsha Mendelson, Chaya Masters, Louise Remfer, Dan Staggs.
I have a few concerns. One is on the impact. I used to call Border Patrol maybe once or twice a year. Now I at least call them once a month. All I have to do is give dispatch my phone number, they have my name, my address. I think I've been impacted on this quite a bit. Secondly, I'm sure Chief Gilbert doesn't know about this, but I'm a semi-Border Patrol agent for you. I'm a civilian Border Patrol agent. There came a time I saw 9 illegals jump into a small white vehicle, gave the Border Patrol their license number, was following them for me. I usually do not talk on my cell phone when I'm driving, but I was following them for the Border Patrol. This poor dispatcher could not get a car, could not get a helicopter. And we have a checkpoint right down there, and he could not get anybody. And I said to him, I said, the checkpoint's right there. He says, I know, but I can't get anybody. Well, I left and came back down, coming home, and I found the car with the passenger door open. I called, stopped, happened to get the same dispatcher, and I said, so-and-so, did you catch him? He said, no. I said, well, I got the car here, and I described how it was. Next day, the car was gone. Well, you guys got the car, but you got 9 illegals that got into the U.S. Another time,
I don't mean to cut you off, but if you have a question, shoot it out. Okay, and we've got a lot of folks, and I know you probably have a lot of issues, but we have the GAO team here.
The committees and everybody talking every few minutes.
I know, this is not perfect.
I know. But I then called last March, I got some people, I called the dispatcher, and I did the usual, and I figured, I never called to find out if anybody I called ever got caught. So I called about 2-3 weeks later. I call, and the guy tells me, I can't give you that information because of the Privacy Act. And I go, Privacy Act? He said, your Homeland Security has this Privacy Act. I said, they're not American citizens. I didn't call for a name or address, but he can't give me that information. GAO, that's one of the data you need. How many people are apprehended from us, the civilians, who call Border Patrol and say they're there? How many get through of what we call? Please, sir.
Hi, I'm Jim Brown from Tucson, and it's good to hear so much positive things said in this meeting. Appreciate everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to meeting with Ron Barber in a few days. Anyway, the best place, I'm not affected by NIMBY because I'm down the road or up the road from Tucson. And what I wanted to let you know is, from where I sit, the best place to secure the border is at the border. Every person in Arizona deserves the same protection, from the U.S. government. And secondary defenses are important, like checkpoints. But I guess the question I have is, if a defense is predictable, then how is it effective? And what are we doing, or what is the Border Patrol considering, or what are your plans for placing more tactical outposts or substations with small and temporary footprints in remote areas to reinforce a checkpoint on I-19? It's like a finger in a dam. We've all been to Hoover Dam. You have someone holding a finger or a thumb over the hole, but if there are other holes that are coming, you have to do something to do more. And so my question is about other outposts. Are there any plans?
As I mentioned earlier, our checkpoint is not a standalone. It's part of a larger comprehensive strategy. We have obviously the agents on the border, we have our tactical infrastructure, our technology, as mentioned, SBI nets coming on board. Some of the other things we're doing to address some of the more remote areas where we don't have accessibility is we have stood up several forward operating bases here in Tucson sector recently. Those are areas where it may have taken us up to 2 hours just to get to. We're building small camps in these areas, and our agents are actually staying there for a week at a time. And that gives us a sustaining presence on the immediate border. It's one more mechanism we're using to secure the border at the border, because we want to do that as well. But we can't do it and ignore everything else happening. And they are working for us. We're going to put another one up on the Huachucas. We have one in Bear Valley, Poplar Farms, Saguaro. They're all up and down the border, and we're continuing to build more today.
Hi, my name is Dan Staggs. I live in Tucson. My question would be, what did anyone on this stage do, either from the inception of this plan or up till now, to determine whether this checkpoint, temporary or permanent, would withstand constitutional scrutiny? It seems to me that we already have a ruling from the Supreme Court on field sobriety checkpoints. We know they're unconstitutional. Why isn't this directly analogous?
also on the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of our checkpoints. It goes back couple of decades, and we are within the Constitution, based on the Supreme Court, within our jurisdiction and our authority to conduct these checkpoints within a reasonable distance from the border for immigration purposes, and that has been vetted through the Supreme Court.
And what did the Supreme Court say about reasonable distance? Because to us, this is our backyard and our home. You know, if you look at these 200 or so people here, probably every one of us have been stopped at least 20 times in the last year. You've got 20,000 stops here, which is not one single arrest or conviction. That's a statistic we don't hear about.
The Supreme Court actually talks about it's Martinez Fuente, if you're like, you can research that, but it's also, our policies dictate that our checkpoints are within 100 air miles of the border. And that's what we
believe. So 100 air miles north and put up this checkpoint.
That's correct.
Hi, my name is Haya Masters, and I'm a homeowner in Tubac, and I have 3 questions, and I'll be very quick. The first one is for Chief Gilbert in terms of the procedures at the checkpoint. Every time I go through on a daily basis, coming from Tubac to Tucson, I'm simply asked, are you an American citizen? And never am I asked for my ID to prove it. So I want to know, how is that effective? Because anybody can say yes. And if they have an American speak, that I don't see how that does anything. Second is, my question is for the GAO, for GAO and for Congresswoman Giffords. Mexico recently, somebody mentioned about the fact that the study being done, perhaps in a bubble and whatnot in terms of the checkpoint. Mexico recently legalized, certain quantities of drugs and whatnot. So I'm wondering how and we all know that that's another heated issue in America, that being, legalization of marijuana and whatnot and such. Whether or not you're for or against it, I just want to know how that's being taken into consideration in terms of the need for this checkpoint, because we are not living in a vacuum, and this is something that I think should have been considered in terms of what you were looking at. And one last question, or actually one more thing. When we bought the house in Tubac, property values were much higher, and part of it has to do with the economy, but the other part of it has to do, I do believe, with the crime that's been rising down past the checkpoint and with the checkpoint itself. So the fact that you would stand up here and say that property values are rising in Tubac, I beg to differ, being a homeowner. Thank you.
Well, on the first question, it's an immigration checkpoint. So every individual coming through there is going to be asked their citizenship, and if they're not U.S. citizens, then their immigration status. And the agents we're trained to look for unique characteristics. And somebody who is trying to come through the checkpoint illegally is going to behave, act, and just carry themselves different than the way you do when you come through. So there's a lot of training that goes into the agent working the checkpoint.
And terrorists aren't trained to be able to say yes?
It's not that simple.
I disagree. Go ahead.
Well, it must have some value, or the criminal elements would be trying to circumvent it. So, I mean, we know there's value to the checkpoint. We know, and also we know what is happening in Mexico in regards to the checkpoint. The fact that it went down and 5 loads drove up by 19, there's value to it, or that wouldn't have happened. And if anybody could just drive up to it and say U.S. citizen, we wouldn't have arrested 5,500 people trying to walk around it.
Just quickly with regard to the data on the housing prices, yeah, the latest data that we had that were available were from assessed values in 2008. There's some lag to those. I wish my house was worth as much today as it was in 2008, and I can sympathize with it.
At the ports of entry, the federal goal is to detect and apprehend 30% of major illegal activity, and this shows the need for a 3-tiered strategy.